As a business owner, if you figure out which one of these two types of businesses you are, you can really figure out how content is going to make a positive impact in your business. As somebody who's worked with small businesses all the way up to middle market private equity platforms, I'm here to tell you that the difference between figuring out whether you're a demand generation or demand fulfillment business can make all the difference in your marketing strategy. What is up, guys? Hope everybody is having a great day today. I wanted to get right into it. I wanted to talk about the difference between demand generation and demand fulfillment, because I think every business is either a demand generation business or it's a demand fulfillment business. And so when we go through the slides, you'll not only be able to figure out which one you are, but you'll be able to understand how your content strategy is going to be altered based on which one of the businesses you are. And so I've got a couple slides in here that we can basically get right into it. And so the first thing that we want to do is talk about the difference between demand generation and demand fulfillment. And so I think a lot of times people just think marketing is marketing and sales is sales and promotion is promotion. But I think that if you understand what type of business you're in first, it will help you figure out your marketing strategy and where content plays a role. And so in demand generation, I have it on the screen. It says you create the desire. The customer doesn't know they need what you sell. You educate, you inspire, and build belief before any transaction is possible. Basically, the way I look at demand generation businesses are businesses that provide you value for things you want and things you don't necessarily need. And so in the next slide, I'm going to talk about a couple of business examples that are demand generation businesses and really the separation there. But I think that demand generation businesses are businesses that you might not have been looking for originally, but because of the way they market, because of the way that they promote, you can see the value that they add in your life. And then on the flip side, demand fulfillment is really when the desire and the need already exists, but the customer is actively looking for the solution. So think about a lot of things in life. There are things that you understand that, hey, this may actually provide value to my life. And then there are things that you're not worried about the value that they necessarily provide. You just need a solution right away. And so this next slide does a really good job of breaking down the same industry, but really demand generation versus demand fulfillment. So if we go to the next slide, so I wanted to use two industries that are close to my heart. I wanted to use home service and I wanted to use fitness, just because those are two industries that I think a lot of people can understand and it would make a lot of sense. So if we look at fitness, right, demand generation is new methodologies, right? It says faith-based brands because I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. And so I'm always looking at different faith-based brands in the market, and then supplements that aren't necessarily the foundation of what you're doing. So there's one I actually saw the other day where it was like a supplement for runners. And so it helps runners reduce lactic acid, and it helps all this other stuff. There's lots of things like beetroot extracts and things like that necessarily aren't foundational, but they're supplemental to what you're trying to do as far as your fitness goals. Now, if we go to the fulfillment side, if you have a personal trainer, right, usually what happens when you need a personal trainer is not that you see content online and that you're trying to figure out that you need a coach, right? What usually happens with a personal trainer is the fact that you've already stated that you have a problem, right? So you already stated that you need to get in shape, you need to get healthier. Like my dad did this 2 years ago where he started getting back into the gym, but he was the one who had to take the next step in order to figure out who was going to provide that value for him. So with a personal trainer, like I said, they're not necessarily creating content to alert you that you need to work out. You've already stated that you're going to work out, and so now you're seeing who can provide you value. Another example of this is gym memberships, right? So if we go back to the new methodologies, right, they're not necessarily something you have to do, right? So if you're in fitness, you understand that the basis of fitness is exercising, caloric deficit, cardio. And if you do the foundational things, you can get pretty far. But with the new methodologies, if we go back to the demand generation side, you're going to have to convince somebody that the new methodology is better than what's foundational, right? Where on the flip side, going back to the gym memberships of the demand fulfillment side, it's like if you need a gym membership, right? You already know what you need. You're just looking for somebody to solve that problem for you. And it's part of the reason why, if you think about it, when people need a certain gym, right, they're not necessarily driving an hour away from their house. The first thing that they look at is they say, okay, first thing they look at usually is what's the price. But the second thing they look at is usually how far is this gym from my house? And then going back to the supplements, right? There's a lot of supplements that people think that they need and that content shows you the benefits of, but they're not necessarily foundational. But if I look at protein powder, it's like if I exercise, right, I'm going to need protein powder. And so it's one of these things that like I'm going to need it. So now I'm going to figure out who can solve that problem for me because I've stated it out loud. If we go to the home services side, this is another industry that I've worked very heavily in. So if we look at things like generators, solar panels, even like cool foundations or waterproofing, it's like the world isn't going to end if you don't get stuff that's in the demand generation sector. So you have to do a good job of showing people the value in order for them to take money out of their day-to-day and then invest it in there. Because at the end of the day, it's like you're going to have to convince somebody that the money they had set aside for something else is now going to go to that product or service you sell. But if we look at home services on the fulfillment side, we have HVAC repair, we have pest control, we have emergency plumbing, right? Like, and I've actually experienced all three of these in a matter of owning my house in the first 4 years. And so it's one of these situations where if you have a problem, you don't care necessarily about who solves it. You just need it solved properly. So like with our HVAC system, we've had some nightmares when we first moved into the house where it would like leak and we'd have to like file a claim to get our ceiling fixed and stuff like that. And I remember it happened at like midnight, and I remember I went onto Google and I just typed like HVAC leakage and I clicked the first listing in order to get them out to my house. Same thing with pest control. When we first moved into our house, the homeowners that had the pest control contract before let it cancel, and so we didn't have pest control for like the first 6 months. We dealt with termites, not the type that eat the wall, just the type that are annoying. And because we didn't have pest control, they were all over the place. So when that happened, literally to this day, I want to say we have 2 pest control memberships because I called, my wife called, and we just said, hey, we have a problem and we just need somebody out here right away. So I wanted to give that clear example of like demand generation versus demand fulfillment in certain industries. And so what I would tell you is, if you get tactical with yourself and you ask yourself, is what I'm selling 100% needed, or do I have to provide value in order for you to buy it? That will tell you if you have a demand generation business or demand fulfillment business. An example of this in what I do is there's stuff like AI automations, there's stuff like YouTube channels, there's stuff like content, right? Where that can be looked at as a demand generation thing, right? At the basis of every marketing strategy, we always talk about it, content's important. But the fact of the matter is, I understand that somebody's going to have to take a piece of their budget that they might not have delegated before in order to invest in this. Now, on the flip side, there's a lot of stuff in marketing that's demand fulfillment. An example of this is a website, is a Google business profile. It's like you have to have it to even compete. And so people who sell that service oftentimes are getting people who call and who automatically say, hey, I just need to get this set up today because I need it for my business. So I wanted to break that down to really show you the difference in the understanding of demand generation versus demand fulfillment, and really the questions to ask yourself to figure out if you are in the demand fulfillment business or if you're in the demand generation business. And so when we talk about each of these, I want to talk about the role of creating content at scale, because I do feel like content is super important in all aspects of business, but I wanted to break it down because it's going to be different based on what type of business you are running. So in demand generation, content is the product. It changes the belief before anyone considers buying. It builds authority, and you see it all over social. I have on here YouTube, podcasts, newsletters, and all of those other things, right? when it comes to demand generation, right, you really have to do a lot of grunt work on the front end, especially from your organic strategy, in order to get people to understand not only what you sell, but the value that you sell, right? It's part of the reason why you see people do these marketing campaigns and they talk about, we'll get you this or you don't pay, or do you want to do this for free? Fill out the form below and somebody will contact us, right? It's because you were never in necessarily the mood, or you were never in the understanding that you needed to spend that, but they're trying to get you in their ecosystem to show you the value. And so when it comes to content at scale, if you run a demand generation business, it needs to be the lifeblood of what you do, right? Because you need to educate people, you need to entertain people, and you need to show the value of your product or service to people in order for them to buy, right? On the demand fulfillment side, though, it's more of a back-end amplifier. So like in demand fulfillment, if we go back to the HVAC repair story that I talked about, right? If I was researching companies and let's say like I needed my HVAC to get fixed, but it wasn't like an immediate thing. Like let's say it's not super hot outside and I can wait a day or two. If I start researching companies, that demand is going to get fulfilled by a company. But the benefit is if people start searching my company in order to fulfill that demand, content builds credibility and it reduces the friction, right? So there can be a lot of industries where people need a certain product or service, but for example, the industry might not put pricing out right away, or the industry might not put out like the turnaround time to complete the project. If you're that person in a demand fulfillment industry who can create content at scale that creates more credibility and reduces friction, it'll help you on the back end, because a lot of times what happens is your customers are already saying, I need help. And so if you're the one who can create content at scale, you can be the one who says, we're here to help you and let us show you why. So demand generation, content is the cornerstone because you need to educate, entertain, and really show people the value. And then in demand fulfillment, content creates more credibility and it reduces friction because you're able to understand what's going on. An example of this is the supplement world. So if we go back to the other slide, I talked about protein powder being a demand fulfillment industry, right? And so because it's a demand fulfillment industry, the content that all of these supplement companies create allows people to confirm their credibility. It allows people to see that they're legit. It's why you see a lot of supplement companies not necessarily trying to push heavy on paid ads, right? It's why they build communities. It's why they build brand. It's why they get certain influencers, right? Because what happens is people have already stated, hey, I need this. And so they want to show you the credibility as to why you should go with them. Another example of this is Shohei Ohtani recently signed a watch deal with Seiko, I believe Grand Seiko as well. And a lot of people think that they did that because they'll have more Shohei Ohtani fans buy Seikos. And that's partially true. But the real reason they did that is because they want watch people who are Shohei Ohtani fans to know about their brand, right? And so that sounds like I'm saying the same thing, but what I'm trying to tell you is there's lots of Shohei Ohtani fans that don't care about watches, but they're focused on the people who care about watches and care about Shohei Ohtani for them to look at their brand and their brand alone. And so when we talk about demand generation and demand fulfillment, right, there's a different strategy, I think, for each type of business. So I think personally, and some people may disagree, and that's a great thing about America, we have the ability to agree to disagree. I think that demand generation requires you to have a strong organic foundation, but you then have to build paid to amplify it. Whereas I think demand fulfillment businesses need a strong paid strategy, and then you need the organic to confirm the credibility, like I've said before. So, for example, if I run a home renovation business where I renovate bathrooms and things like that, right? Like I need to build the organic content That way I have lots of creatives and lots of stuff talking about the services that we provide. But then I'm going to have to run Facebook ads. I'm going to have to run YouTube ads in order for people to see me. That way, as they are watching the content and learning, like, we generate that demand for them to want to do that. Right? On the flip side, if I'm somebody who's running a plumbing business, I personally would go to somebody who can help me run PPC ads, Google local service ads, right? And I would make sure all of that stuff is optimized, because you're already going to have an ecosystem of intent-based people wanting your product and wanting the service that you provide. And then once you have that, the content takes it to the next level, because all of a sudden people are getting to connect with you. People are getting to connect with your company. And then that alone is going to separate you. And so I think that the strategy kind of flips based on what type of business you're in. And so I just wanted to get on here and talk about that, because I think a lot of times what happens is people think that they are in demand fulfillment. And because they haven't generated a lot of demand, they wonder why they're not selling a lot of their product or service. And then on the flip side, people think that they're in demand generation. But the fact of the matter is, you already have an ecosystem of people looking for you. You just have to figure out how to stand out. And at the basis of it, like I've always said, content is the best thing to do that with. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to message me at Instagram at FRHeart2. Like I said, because at the end of the day, content is not just about views, likes, and engagement. It's about making an impact by building leverage in anything you're doing. So understand whether you run a demand generation or demand fulfillment business, and then understand the importance of content in that business. And I promise you, once you understand that, sky's the limit to where you're going to go. Have a great day, and God bless.